So hey there friends, it's Erica Webb here with episode 221 of SelfKind. Today I thought we could talk about the process of getting to know oneself over a lifetime and how that can be kind of tricky and confronting and hard, and how we can use a somatic lens to make that process perhaps a little easier and to understand a little bit more clearly how the body and mind are influencing each other and to get more comfortable with the reality of the changes that we go through as we age. So this episode is brought to you by my rapidly greying hair. And I was sort of thinking this week about what will I talk about on the podcast this week? What would be helpful to the people who are listening? And of course, I have no way of knowing the answer to that question, but hopefully what I've landed on will be really helpful for you this week. If you follow me over on Instagram, you'll know that I have stopped dyeing my hair and my hair is going quite grey. And I'm finding the process of going grey quite interesting. I'm finding it quite fascinating to watch. That said, there are days where I look in the mirror and I think, who is this lady? Who is this woman looking back at me? And I remember my mum saying that when I was younger and thinking how could that be possible? You know, you're kind of aging with yourself. How is it a surprise when you look in the mirror and you're like, who is this person? But it's true. And it got me thinking too about how we change. We change as people over a lifetime. And one of the things that I've been really aware of over the last few months in particular is the fact that I do feel like I'm changing. I feel like I'm a bit of a different person than the person that I used to be. And maybe even not that I'm completely different, but that I'm discovering parts of myself that perhaps had been very conditioned over. Parts of myself that I wonder if they've always been there, but I didn't give them permission to kind of see the light of day. So some stuff that I've been pondering, and it's got me thinking about how do we kind of support ourselves through this discovery process, this getting to know you process that I don't think ever ends, because I don't think that we ever arrive at any one place and say, well, this is exactly who I am. I'm never going to change. Our body goes through changes. You know, my hair is an example of that. We will continue to change. We will continue to be different in ways that perhaps we don't expect. Perhaps we do anticipate them, but don't really know what they'll feel like. And so how do we get more comfortable with that process? Because it's inevitable, right? And it's interesting, I shared something on in my stories on Instagram the other day about my tattoo. And I have quite a large tattoo on my lower back that people don't often see because it's mostly covered up by my clothing. And it's interesting to get responses to stuff like that because people were like, you have a tattoo, you know, it kind of seems out of character. And yet it's completely within the way that I think of myself. It's completely within my sort of self-concept. But when you hear people reflect back to you what they almost expect of you, it makes you realize that we are kind of not taught, but there is an element of pressure to be who people expect you to be the same, to be predictable. And I don't know that most of us are when you really dig down far enough. From a movement perspective, you know, we change, right? Our bodies' capacities change based on the input that we're giving our bodies, based on life circumstances, based on age. Things shift, things change. And so being able to have a lens to look through that makes us more curious about that process rather than more judgmental, I think is beyond valuable. So that's what I want to talk about today. And you might think of it as, you know, you might think of it through a number of different kind of angles. And I'll touch on those as we go. But ultimately, I want to share sort of 3 ways that a somatic lens helps us to become, I guess, more curious, less judgmental about the changes that we go through, whether we're thinking about physical, emotional, kind of just discovering who we are and who we want to be. And then 3 questions that help to support that somatic awareness, because it could be new, right? It could be a new way of looking at things, a new way of exploring. So let's start at the beginning in terms of what do I even mean when I say somatic? This word, I've been a somatic exercise coach for, how long? I don't know. Maybe 10 years, maybe a little less. And it's a word that over the last 10 years has become more and more understood and more known. I think it's probably more known than understood, though, in the kind of common usage. And it gets used in lots of different ways. So there's a lot of different sort of therapeutic modalities that use the word somatic. They probably aren't all using it in the same way. So I want to just explain the way that I'm referring to this idea of somatics, or soma is what I'll talk about, so that we've got a bit of a common base here to continue to explore from. So from the way that I have both been taught and then continue to explore this idea of somatics, to me, the soma is the capacity that we have as individuals to experience ourselves from the inside out in the fullness of what it is to be human. So that means being aware of our sensations, being aware of our experiences from the inside out, which is going to include things like our thoughts, things like our reactions, things like our kind of internal body-based physiological experiences, and then how those things interact and how those things influence each other. Often you'll hear of sort of somatic practices as just being kind of the body-based practices, which is a totally legitimate way to use that word as well. But when I am using that, I really want to think about it through this lens of the fullness of what it is to be in a human form, right? This idea of like the body and the mind interacting, influencing each other. And this recognition that we are the only one that has access to the fullness of that experience, because you're the only one that's in there, right? Nobody else can kind of insert themselves into your being and be like, well, I know what your somatic experience is. When I work with people one-on-one, one of the most valuable things that I can do as a support to that person is to believe their inner experience. You wouldn't believe how many people, maybe you would actually, because maybe it's happened to you, how many people are just not believed and supported in their experience of what it is to be them, what it is to be in their body. And what an awful experience, right? To have someone say, well, no, that's not right. That can't be true. It's like, well, what? Of course it is. It's exactly what I'm experiencing. But then we start to doubt ourselves when other people are telling us that what we're experiencing isn't true. And so this somatic lens, this lens of being within your soma, asks you to start building up that self-trust again. Asks you to start getting curious about what's true rather than what you think should be true, or rather than what anyone else is telling you is true. So that's kind of the lens from which I'm talking about somatics, this somatic lens, this somatic view, this somatic perspective. And so I've got three, what are they? I don't know, three things that I think a somatic lens can support us to do when it comes to exploring change, both in our body, our movement, our personality, our approach, our responses, our interests, all of those things. So the first one is that this somatic lens, this somatic approach, and I've already said this, but let's formalize it. The somatic approach asks you to be more curious about what is rather than what you think should be. So it asks us to get more curious about the reality of what is right now than we are about any notion of should. Now, where this gets interesting is that we might go down that path at some point, right? And should is a word that I always think, let your little flags, wave when you hear that word from yourself or anyone else, because it's a terrible word. But it can ask us to get curious down the track about well, what is it that I want, right? Because what is might not align with what you want. And that gives us space to explore. But the first place we have to start is in noticing what is true. I feel blah. I am experiencing right? It could be I am feeling pain. I am feeling tension. I am experiencing a sense of disconnection within myself. I am feeling really confronted by the fact that I've gone grey. I am feeling really confronted by the fact that my hip hurts all the time. I am feeling frustrated. I am feeling whatever. Without the stuff that tends to come after that, the explanation, the judgment, the even the justification, right? Just a simple acknowledgement of what is and letting yourself be present to that. Acknowledging without kind of traveling down that pathway of guilt and shame and what if is so, so valuable. It allows you to be heard and seen by yourself as a first step, which is a very cool thing indeed. The second thing is that because this somatic approach asks us to experience ourselves from the inside out, and because it asks us to include both the mental, even you might even say spiritual side of things, along with the experience of physical body stuff, it allows us to draw on both, and it allows us to start to see how those things interact. The mental, the physical, and dare I say, the spiritual. It allows us to see how do all of these elements interact in my experience of what it is to be in this being, right? And that on its own has the potential to really inspire this sense of curiosity over judgment. Now, I talk about judgment a lot as being something that's just going to happen automatically in your brain because your brain does the judging thing as a way of making sense of the world. So I'm not saying that judgment will just disappear in a flash of light. It will probably hang around. You probably will still hear that voice of like judgment stuff. But by taking the somatic view of things, it allows us to see that judgment for what it is and to kind of bypass it or circumvent it with curiosity. Just sort of like be like, okay, I'm just going to sit that aside for a minute. I see it. I see the judgment. That's fine. But where can I get curious? Where can I get curious about the way that what I'm thinking is influencing how I feel? How can I get curious about the way that I feel influencing the way that I'm thinking? How can I get curious about all of that sense of awareness and feeling that is within me? And you know, that curiosity is priceless because it gives us more doorways, more options, more flexibility than judgment ever will. The third one is that I think a somatic lens, a somatic approach can really foster self-compassion as a result of those first 2 points, because we are getting more curious about what is, and we are blending the body and the mind, or the body and the brain. When we do that, when we acknowledge what is true, we're automatically priming ourselves for self-compassion because we're not creating that same kind of level of judgment, blame, shame. It's like, here's just what it is. Here's how I feel. And I can sense and feel and get curious about the way that everything's interacting, the way that I'm experiencing myself. And I can meet myself with compassion in that. I can meet myself with kindness. I can meet myself with a sense of curiosity. And so I think a somatic lens really fosters that sense of self-compassion. And consequently, as we get closer to our own humanity, it allows us to be able to see that in others. It allows us to be able to kind of stretch our compassion out to them as well. And we often think of this as being the other way around, right? We often think, oh, it's so easy to be compassionate towards other people, but I find it really hard to be compassionate towards myself. And what I will tell you from my own experience, which, you know, obviously is just mine, I have so much more capacity to be compassionate towards others in a way that feels very real and true compared to the alternative, because of my increased capacity to be compassionate towards myself. Because I see my humanity, I see all of it. I'm sure there's things that I miss, but you know, I'm not trying to push any of it away. And in doing that, I feel like it gives me much more capacity to hold space for other people's humanity as well. Because I'm not kind of trying to pretend that mine is not what it should be. It just is what it is, right? So those are the three of, I don't think they're the only three, but I think that those are three of the benefits of kind of looking through this somatic lens. If we bring it back to that first example of going grey, the somatic approach asks, well, actually, let's take it to something more body-based in terms of, how you're feeling in your body. Let's just say that, like me, you've gotten a little older, you don't feel quite the same way that you used to, and you're noticing, oh, my right hip is all I saw. The somatic approach asks us to get curious, right? If we go through these 3 steps, it asks us to get more curious about what is rather than what should be. What is? My right hip hurts, and it's making me worried about what that means for my mobility as I age. It's making me frustrated that I can't do that thing that I really want to do, and that gardening is suddenly a lot harder, right? So just simple statements of what is. It then allows us to sort of look at that body-mind connection, body-mind-spirit even, and to say, how can I get curious about how these elements are influencing each other rather than just jumping down the judgment path. And so in that example, isn't it interesting that I'm experiencing this kind of physical discomfort, and it's influencing the way that I'm thinking. It's kind of causing me to travel off down these kind of worst case scenario paths. And that fear seems to also be increasing what I'm feeling in my body. And so being able to get curious about how are these things influencing each other, which will make more sense when we get to the questions that help to support that somatic awareness. So hold that thought. And then that self-compassion that comes along with that third point, being able to recognize, oh yeah, wow, some of that worried thinking that I'm doing is because of the impact that this physical pain is having. I can see how I'm suffering. I can see how I'm scared. I can see how I'm uncomfortable. And even in the midst of that discomfort, fear, etc., I am so worthy of my own kindness, my own love, my own ability to see myself. And then 3 questions that help to support this somatic awareness. Because like I said, maybe you hear that and you think, okay, that's cool, that sounds nice, but how do I actually do it? I don't know how to get in touch with that. And so I want to offer you 3 questions that may or may not be helpful. I hope they are, but there's more that we can talk about if these are not the 3 for you. So the first question is the question, what am I feeling? Now, sometimes we have to just ask that question and then get quiet and notice what's there. It might not be words that you can use to describe what you're feeling. The question, what am I feeling, really asks us just to pause and get curious about what we notice. So it might be that you just feel it. You don't describe it, you don't share it, you don't articulate it in any way, but you give yourself the opportunity to feel it. So often we want to have the words to put around things, which is fine and can be of great value. But what if you just give yourself permission to feel without having to articulate? Does that help? The second question is like, what might I need next? And this, I like the wording of this question because it's not what do I need? It's not presupposing that there's one answer that you have to hope like heck you've figured out, right? There could be a whole bunch of things that you could do that would all meet your needs in some way. And so this question of like, what might I need next? In that example of the physical discomfort, is it that I need to go and book an appointment with a physiotherapist or an osteopath? Is it that I need to get down on the floor and do some movement? Is it that I need to drink some more water? Is it that I need to go run myself a hot bath? Is it that I need to offer myself compassion because I'm getting into a fear loop? You could keep going down that path. What might I need next? And listening to your body, listening to the feelings that come up as you kind of contemplate, like, what might it be? Can you feel the answer to that? Or at least an answer to that? Because again, there might not be one. And then the third question is, how does responding in the way that I choose to respond then make me feel? So it almost loops us right back around to question 1. What am I feeling? We're starting to notice, what does what I choose to do in response to what I'm noticing, how does that impact then how I feel? How does that impact that mind-body experience of myself from the inside out? And so simple questions, but probably not always very easy, that help us to tap into like just that sense of curiosity. And the thing is, with a somatic approach, a somatic lens, nobody's going to tell you if you're doing this right or wrong. And that's probably the thing that I come up against the most when people are like, but how do I know if I'm doing this right? Because there's no way for somebody on the outside to tell you that, is there? No. It's a process of exploration. It's a process of discovery. It's a process of just continuing to be curious about yourself. And that's what I kind of want to end on, is this idea of what if there is no destination, but by taking a somatic lens of ourselves, it gives us the space and permission to continue to be curious and hold lightly any kind of concrete notions that we have about what it is to be us. It's lovely to kind of hold on to these ideas of who we are and the things that matter to us. And I do that, right? Like I know my Enneagram, I know my human design, I know my star sign, I know my, what's the other one? Like my strengths. I've done my strengths finder. I've done my, can't think of the other one. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them. I've done them all. I was obsessed with personality quizzes when I was younger, and I still am to an extent, because I want to know myself. I want to understand myself. But sometimes those tools also make us believe that we are fixed, that we don't change, that we are just exactly what we are, and that's kind of how it is. But I really don't think that's true. I really think that the nature of being human is this sense of evolution, this sense of exploration and excavation even sometimes, because we are not all given permission as young humans to just be who we are and to follow our joy and to follow our curiosity. A lot of us, as we've gotten older, are realizing that we have to kind of like start chipping away at the conditioning that has layered itself upon our experience of ourselves. And sometimes that leads us to question, like, is that actually me, or is that the conditioning that has been present for decades that I've kind of only just learned to question now? And so this somatic lens gives us this permission to do that excavation, but also to recognize that maybe even once we've done that, it's just an ongoing process, because we continue to get older, we continue to change, we continue to be interested in new things and stay interested in old things as well. Getting more comfortable with the both and. I think that is like the ultimate gift of this somatic lens. It allows us to be present to what is, which allows us to be present to the contradictions that are the hallmark of being human. It allows us to get more comfortable with the both and of our humanity. And that is such an incredible gift, honestly. So I hope that those questions, I hope that those benefits are helpful to you. Let me know. You can come and find me over on Instagram. I'm at Erica Webb _SelfKind. If you want support, I sort of said nobody else can do this for you, and that is absolutely true. But this is the work that I support the humans that I work with to do. So if you're curious and you're like, yes, I need or want some support in this exploration, reach out, see how we can work together. I have got openings for one-on-one at the moment, and the SelfKind Hub is also open to members at the moment. So feel free to head to the links in my show notes or just reach out and have a chat with me to see what would be a better fit. All right, until next week, keep being kind to yourself. I'll talk to you again really soon.